Welcome to See Me After Class, the podcast where we chat about anything and everything that comes to mind that we can't always cover in class. In each episode, we'll be joined by friends, faculty, staff, or enthusiasts to have an informal conversation about topics that interest us. From pop culture to current events, from hobbies to how-tos, we will cover it all with a lighthearted and fun approach. So grab your favorite yummies, get comfy, and join us as we chat and laugh our way through this thing called life. This is See Me After Class, and we are really excited that you're here. So let's get started. All right, well, good afternoon. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to See Me After Class, where we bring you real stories, fresh perspectives, and great conversation straight from our campus community. Now, today we have a special guest with us. Joining us today, I've given him the name Professor J, but that is not his name. But I'm going to have him introduce himself, and he will give a little bit about himself. So go ahead.
Good afternoon. Most of my students call me Professor Shango, so that's fine. My friends call me Brother J, so I like that informal title. But I'm from the Houston area, grew up in Houston. My paternal side of the family is from Louisiana, not far from Lafayette. So I'm a product of Texas and Louisiana, and I've traveled all over the country, all over the world, and happy to be back here in Houston now, teaching here at Lone Star College.
Well, awesome. We are so excited to have you and also you listening. So today I just want you to sit back, relax, and let's just talk. Now, you say Professor J, that's really interesting because my brother, I call him Uncle J, even though he's not my uncle, he's my brother. So that informal, I don't know why, when I was just like, I know I can call him Professor Shango and everything, but I prefer, if that's okay, if I call you Professor J.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. And therefore, as students, if you're listening, then you also still give some respect because this man, he's a globe-trotting professor. He has been a lot of places. And hopefully we'll get to some of those experiences as we talk today. So you gave us a little backstory, but if you can, give us a little bit more of like what inspired you to become a teacher. And specifically, I know here at the campus you teach African American history.
Right.
So what inspired you to do that?
I would say really teachers inspired me to want to teach. I'm very blessed and fortunate to have lived with a lot of good teachers in my life, and that's been a major part of my upbringing. I would say my first teacher, which was really like an informal teacher, was my grandfather. You know, part of our culture, particularly in the South, is in the summer months, a lot of us will go to the country and spend time with grandma and grandpa. So every summer, my mother and them, they'd load us up in the car and drive us to Louisiana where we spent our summer months there. My grandfather, he didn't have much formal education. He was a farmer. He worked a lot of time in the sugar mills of the Lafayette area. And I just remember going there and visiting with him as a child, helping him out with projects. He was a master carpenter. And on all of these projects that we were on, he would always talk about our family's history. And I just kind of got hooked on his storytelling, but also I got hooked on family history. And that was really my introduction to history in general, learning about my family. And then the home that my grandfather built for my grandmother, it literally sits on a former sugar plantation. And so he would also talk about the history of slavery and sharecropping. And, you know, so I began to make connections between my family's history and the broader African American experience. And when I would go back to Houston to go to school, talking to my formal teachers in the classroom, they, you know, detected that interest that I had in history, and they started feeding me books. And so I got hooked on books and reading as much as I could. I also spent a lot of time in the I guess I would say the grassroots community of Houston. Some people might be familiar with the Shape Center. So I spent time in environments where African American history was celebrated, it was taught, it was a part of our routine experiences. So I always had an interest and fascination with history. And by the time I graduated from high school, I knew that I wanted to study history and then ultimately teach. So that's kind of how I got involved. And I try to, encourage my students to take more interest in their own family's history, because our family's history is a part of the American experience. It's a part of the African American experience. It might not be literally in the textbooks, but you can actually find your family story in the story of America, or in the case of African Americans, you can find that story in the story of the African American experience. So that's what hooked me, learning about my family and just broadening that. And then from that American and African American experience, as I matured in my studies, I began to make connections with Africa and the Caribbean islands and just the broader, global or world history.
Wow. That is really interesting. First and foremost, to know that you have a family of teachers, it sounds like, that really I can relate to. Like most of my family, they teach. But I do work amongst teachers and I live amongst teachers. So to hear how it all started, I have to say that I can understand, I can relate, because for me, becoming more involved with what's going on today and learning about the history of African Americans here in the U.S. It all started because just listening to my grandmother, who now has Alzheimer's, and when she's talking about our history, and then I start looking it up, and then I did the whole ancestry DNA thingy.
Right.
And it's just like, it does spark an interest. If even being able to listen to your grandparents, if you're blessed to have them, talk about history, listening to your aunts and uncles talk about your family history, it is usually the linchpin of more, inquiry, diving deep and looking into it, which I do have to say has been really difficult for me, because I realized that for the census taking back in the day was not as thorough in the Black community. And then, of course, with the Black community not really being educated, they didn't know how to spell. So it would vary the spelling every 10 years. You really have to be patient and look and remember what people have told you, names, write it down, jot it down. You will be amazed at the history, how it unfolds.
And just talking to grandma and grandpa and older family members.
Yes.
They have that history in their memory bank, and so just sitting down at family gatherings, holidays, I had a thing with my daughters where when we went to family reunions, before they could run off and play with their little cousins, they had to informally interview an older relative, if it was an aunt or grandma, grandfather, whatever the case was, because that's where the history is, the living history. It's not always something that's in books and archives. We have living histories in our own families, and you can get to that information just sitting down talking to them.
Yes. And there's something I always like to tell people, and I'm just going to drop it right now. Kiddos, everyone, history is being made every single moment that you breathe. So you are history in the making. So it's like, learn about your history, but also remember that you are currently in the process of writing the pages of history and how it's going to go and where it's going to go. So please learn it so you don't have to repeat the bad stuff, but also remember you are a pivotal part. You are a stitch in this fabric of America. So
certainly.
But let's talk about history and chronicling it. So a lot of people don't realize, especially in the minority communities, that history is not chronicled as we see it in history books all the time. It's not always written and everything by scholars, because that some pockets of our community were not able to be educated to do that. But we do have it chronicled in writers that were able to get the education, artists, with the drawings and sketches and woodwork, and even as far as our hair for African American women, the braiding of the hair and stuff, and musicians. My favorite chronicling of history is gospel hymns.
Right.
And knowing the meaning behind some of the gospel hymns that we learned in church for those of us that were raised in the church.
Right.
But it's like that is a piece of the history. So what do you think? Do you think that it's changing with, the way young people, some of the music that's out there? Do you think it's changing? Is it chronicling it as, I want to say as potent as it used to be? And then how do you think that will impact our history, our culture?
Right. I think there's a place in just the kind of popular culture for history. If it's in rap, if it's in other musical genres, if it's in art, if it's in plays and, performances like that. But I also think that there is a very, very important role that is played by the scholar. The artists, the visual artists, the spoken word artists, the rap, artists, they may sprinkle some information in a song or portray it in a painting or some type of theatrical production, but that's not a substitute for, scientifically documented historical text, and sometimes the little bit of information that people hear or see in popular culture, it may terribly oversimplify, and perhaps even dumb down the work that historians do. So that's the balancing act that you have to try to have is, it's good to have that information out. You mentioned the hymns and the gospel music. There was some years back, Wynton Marsalis, very famous New Orleans-based jazz musician, he put out a 2-volume or a 2-disc album called Blood on the Fields, and it was Cassandra Wilson. It's a jazz album, but the whole theme of that album is slavery, and the African-American slavery experience. And so in the narration that's included in the CD, the bits and pieces of talking that they're doing in between the songs, they're sprinkling in the history. So I think that that's, good. But again, sitting down with a book and reading, or sitting in a classroom, where the instruction is being done, I think that's also important. 'Cause sometimes what we could do in our scholarly books and scholarly presentations is we can correct some of the misinformation that's out there. And this is very common now in the age of social media and podcasts, and it's a lot of foolishness that's out there. You mentioned the DNA tests. DNA tests are really confirming in many instances what historians have documented. DNA tests are confirming what archaeological evidence has already given us. And so when you have these, professionally produced books or genetic analysis, then you could kind of laugh off claims that African Americans aren't descendants of Africa, for example, which is very common in the parlay of today. People want to say the slave trade didn't happen, and African people were already here, and stuff like that. You can easily refute with concrete historical documentation, but the DNA evidence, when stuff like that comes out, it allows you to have more ammunition in those kind of debates.
Yeah, you're right. Misinformation is out there on so many different levels. Godly, it's so many different levels. But that's a very interesting point of view, because that it is true that the art usually is inspired by something that was learned,
Right.
From a book or a teaching, So I see your point.
But one thing too to remember about art is that it does have that element of entertainment. And so sometimes focusing on that element of entertainment may cause people to compromise on the historical accuracy.
Yes.
You know, there are movies out now based on the book 12 Years a Slave. There have
Key
been,
word you said is based.
right, there are movies out based on the Amistad uprising on a slave vessel. You know, there are movies on the lives of people like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King and Rosa Parks and, you know, Phyllis Wheatley and all these other historical figures. But sometimes because the goal is to entertain, you may not get a completely accurate historical representation.
I like that. I need to crack open a few more books.
Yeah.
let's movie watching. Let's binging.
Well, the movies are good. I think you just kind of balance them out with the actual historical record.
I agree. Now, talking about balancing and history and stuff, learning our history, this is one of those kind of like, I want to say kind of laid back questions.
Right.
So if you could sit with any historical figure from African American history, who would it be and what would you ask them?
Oh, man. Wow.
Not as laid back?
Well, I wouldn't, you know, my definition of African Americans is probably a bit different from others.
Okay, well, explain that.
Because sometimes when I say African American, I may mean like African people in the Americas. So if you're talking about North America, South America, Central America, or the United States of America, all of those people of African descent in those collective areas could be broadly considered African Americans. A lot of times we just immediately lock into this experience in the United States and leave out Black people in Jamaica, in Haiti, in Colombia, in Panama, in Cuba, you know. And so this is kind of like one of those, almost like who's your favorite historical figure, or you know. And so if I answer that question, it would be a name that most people aren't familiar with. Okay. It's an intellectual by the name of Edward Wilmot Blyden, who is from the Virgin Islands, and he spent a lot of his time on the continent of Africa itself. He promoted, you know, connections between, let's say, African Americans or those people of African descent in the Caribbean islands with people of African descent actually on the continent of Africa, right? We call that Pan-Africanism, these global African communities finding ways to connect with each other. And so he actually spent at least most of his adult life in West Africa. He was born in the Caribbean islands, had some of that slavery experience background, but his intellectual pursuits brought him first briefly to the United States, and then he eventually settled in Liberia and in Sierra Leone in West Africa. And he was a big promoter of African Americans reintegrating themselves into traditional African societies. So I would probably ask him about his assessment of these current movements along those lines. You know, you have a lot of groups that take tours to places like Ghana, and you know, African Americans are buying up property in different countries in Africa, especially Ghana, in Kenya and other parts of East Africa. And so some of the experiences that he had trying to bring some unity between those different groups of Black people, you know, I'm curious about how he would feel about some of these current trends that are similar but different in a lot of ways. Yeah. One of the differences is that he encouraged what he called integrating into African cultures and societies. So that means that, like, African Americans aren't going back to set up their own town or set up their own area. He's saying, no, you come and you know, establish relationships with the people who are here now, you know. But I think in this current setting, there may be more of, hey, let's go to Africa, Ghana, let's see if we could buy some land, and this is where all the African Americans are going to live in Ghana, as opposed to, hey, how can we like kind of collectively share this space, But he was one of the early proponents of that type of activity, so that's always been a research topic of interest to me. So I would probably ask him some questions along those lines. What do you think about this modern, what they call Back to Africa movement? And how does it compare to what was happening in the 1800s and, first part of the 1900s, for example?
That's interesting. Well, I would wonder how he would respond, especially with today's society in which when I say you go on like social media and you see Africans that are actually trying to become more American,
right,
with their looks, with their music, with everything. Although you can, like right now, if you watch the music awards, they actually now have artists that are being honored for their contribution to American music,
right,
from Africa, which I love that. But then I go and I look on TikTok and I look on Instagram and I see Africans who are literally, sometimes it'll take me a moment to realize like, that's not here.
right.
That's actually in Nigeria,
Right.
or that's in,
Right.
Ghana or something. And I'm just looking like, wow, are we actually just becoming so like generic now to where there's no longer these distinct things to aim for? Like, because for me over here, I'm just like, I'm trying to find out my roots and my connection to Africa.
Right.
And yet my roots and my connection to Africa seems like it's being Americanized.
Right. Yeah, I think one is the internet age that we're living in. The world has shrunk because people in different parts of the world are now more exposed daily to what's going on everywhere. Mm-hmm. So that influences culture, and cultures are they're not static. They evolve, they transform over time. So I would answer that one way. But I would also say that, everybody not trying to be an American. Everybody's not shedding their traditional cultural ways of life and replacing them with what we see. We just see a snippet of it online, but there are people all over the continent of Africa who are prideful and boastful of their traditional heritage and cultural traditions. And then you have some that, are, but they may just be more influenced by what's going on in the West. So, it's a little of both, and that's not any different from parts of Asia,
yes,
other parts of the world, doing the same thing.
I find that interesting. I would like to, I'd like to be a fly on the wall in that conversation. Could be like,
yeah, that's a long and drawn out conversation, yeah.
Well, I know that we've talked a lot about history and, your experiences and stuff. And it seems like I honestly think that we need to have a more detailed conversation on some of these topics that you've hit. But you spoke of your love and how it started. So what advice would you give students who are passionate about history and they want to make a difference in how it's taught and remembered?
When I was a student at Howard, I went to graduate school at Howard University in Washington, D.C. And I remember one of my professors talking to us about the type of training that's required to be a historian. And he said in very clear language, if you want to be a historian, if you want to be a good historian, there's absolutely no substitute for reading. You have to read.
Yeah.
You have to do your research, go into the archives and, conduct primary research. And that's very important. But you have to read. Mm-hmm. You have to know the history. You have to know the story. So anybody that's interested in going into this field, I would strongly encourage them to, to do as you're almost eating books. You have them, you have such an intimate relationship with them. That's what you're consuming. That's what, you want to master the story, the stories, the narratives, and so that would be my biggest advice is to just read all you can, try to keep up with the latest publications in your subfield of interest. because a lot of times people that say, oh, you're a historian, they think you know all the history of the world, but you may have a geographical area that you're interested in, Asia, or even that can break down to China, Chinese history or Japanese history. You may have an interest in the United States. You may have an interest in African American history, but it's much more narrower. So it may be the civil rights movement. It may be music. It may be the African American religious experience. You know, it may be African American sports, you know, whatever it is. But you want to get the big picture first, you know, understand the general story. And then once you can at least have some command of the general story, then you could start locking in and becoming an expert in the area that you're most interested in. You know, so that's kind of what I would encourage students to do, is to read all you can. You know, try to have some kind of command of the big picture. A lot of times we'll get lost in the details and we can't pull ourselves back and just kind of look at what's really going on here. You know, and so sometimes you do have to take that kind of more generalized and broad approach. So I would encourage them to try to balance out getting a general understanding of history and then focus on becoming an expert in something very specific. Maybe slavery, maybe resistance to slavery, maybe the African cultural traditions that survived slavery. You know, it's all kind of, you know, areas that people take interest in and, you know, contribute something to the conversation that's already been going on. Historians have already been talking for 200 years, 300 years and more, right? What can you add to what we're talking about is a question that they may want to answer or ask at least as they go into the field. You know, we already having a conversation as historians. What are you bringing? What kind of analysis have we left out of the conversation? You know, it might be a little old town in rural Louisiana that nobody's written about. Nobody's talked about that town where your family is from, and you can find some very good, important historical information to bring to our attention. You know, so little stuff like that I would probably encourage them to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm like, guys, I wish you could see. I'm just like dumbfounded just listening because I'm like, oh my God, there's just so many questions that keep popping in my head like, oh, wait, oh, no. So, but if I'm actively listening, then I can't really, I need to be focused. But now I'm listening to you. I think there's only one other person out in the media sphere that I actually listen to the same way. I hope I pronounced his last name correctly. Eddie Glott, I think his name is. But he's a panelist that's usually on like different news. I'm not trying to, promote right now.
Right.
But it's just like he's a professor as well. And when he speaks to certain events that are going on,
Right.
and how he explains the same thing, it's captivating to sit there and know that it's that easy, but at the same time, it's that difficult for some of us because we want to know, but it's like, oh, just pop it in the microwave and give it to me.
Right.
But it doesn't always, you can't, a good meal comes to you in just on a plate, simple. It was cooked
Right.
with the love and so many ingredients that are in there. You can't just like pop it in a microwave. I mean,
Right.
you can, but it's not going to taste the same.
Yeah, the chef made it look easy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm listening to you, I'm like, oh my God. Okay. All right. Then I need to go and look into this person that he just mentioned. But no, that is amazing. And so your students get a chance to hear this when they go and sit in your class.
Yeah.
I looked up your Rate My Professor information,
Right.
and a lot of people say how awesome it is, how much they walk away
Oh,
with learning. So I can now see in the small amount of time I've
Right.
sat and listened as you spoke freely about like with answering these questions. I'm just like, oh my God, now I see what all the information is about.
Yeah. I teach U.S. history and African American history here at Lone Star. The African American history currently is offered online, and online instruction is good. And I've started to like put video lectures together, but it's nothing like the classroom.
No, it isn't.
You know, so
isn't.
hopefully we'll move in that direction in the future and
I'm
be
one of
able to
those
offer.
in-person students, like, because that you can easily get distracted online.
Right. Yeah.
And also, I saw that someone had said, no, he has you write out the essays,
right.
which to me, it's an accountability thing.
Right.
Because, of course, we can always type it. We can get information, copy, paste, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Not telling you how to do anything.
Right.
But at the same time, when you have to write it out,
Right.
you know, it really shows that if you learned what you learned.
Right. And then part of it is at least picking up some skills as a storyteller, you know. So can you tell this story in your own words? You know, so that's one of the reasons I like them to write out, you know, their exams. You know?
Now, most people, when they think of storytelling, they think of English, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like, I've heard you say this earlier in our talk.
Right.
That storytelling. So explain that to me for those who don't understand or don't put the connection together.
Right. So in 1831 in Virginia, there was probably the most significant slave revolt in U.S. history. And it was led by a man named Nat Turner. And Nat Turner had a very close relationship with his grandmother growing up. And, you know, she taught him biblical stories, and, you know, he began to become so immersed in his religious experiences that he started to have visions. And the visions that he began to have, he interpreted those visions as God communicating to him that he was responsible for leading his people out of bondage. So when you're in class, you're telling that story of Nat Turner's life, you know, how he came to be at the helm of a slave revolt, where he was born, the story of his relationship with his grandmother, his attachment to biblical experiences. You know, so it's storytelling. I'm telling you what happened. How was the American Revolution fought? You know, how did George Washington and his marriage, you know, propel him to be more successful and more, you know, influential and wealthier? You know, it's all of these are just stories of events that happened in the past. When you hear the word history, that's what it is. It's a story. You know, so we're just telling stories from the past, and you want to try to make them amusing and interesting and certainly fact-based, you know, but history is just storytelling. That's why some of the best historians are good writers and good storytellers in the classroom. You just kind of reading the book is almost like you're there, you know, so that's what I mean when I say, you know, storytelling.
Okay, and that's what draws me in, because I love a good. I mean, this D&D is not, you know, historically based,
right?
And at the same time, I don't play D&D,
right?
But I do play D&D so I can just listen to the storytelling,
right?
And so
that's good.
It's just, honestly, I'm like, that is what. And when Eddie Gaw, when he talks on these shows,
right?
Even I think his name is John Meacham.
Okay.
They both, when they're talking about historical events that have shaped us and how what's going on now, the comparison.
Right.
I literally am glued to the TV at that moment, because I mean, any other time you can. That's why I don't like online learning, because you can fast forward. You can, you know, you just skip to the part that you want to. But when someone is telling you a historical event and they have the facts, and it's like, but you can get the facts and it still not come across unless someone, like you said, knows how to put the story together.
It's just like if something exciting happens in your day and you go home and you tell your family about it, and you have very colorful expressions and words that you use, and they're like, oh, what else happened? What happened next? You know, and so that's storytelling. And it's a recent experience that you're retelling. With history, we're retelling events from 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, you know, but it's the same principle, you know, of storytelling that's involved.
guys, if you're not into history by now, I don't know what's wrong with you. Because I'm like, honestly, yeah, history is a fascinating subject. And I, quite frankly, don't recommend anyone. No, I'm playing. If you had to take it online, take it online. But it is so much better in person. It's like when they say, when a movie is based on a book and they say, oh, read the book, it is so much better.
Right.
Like, have your history classes in person. It is so much better, especially when you have a professor like Professor J. So just like, please, just you can write that down, take it to the bank. So right now, we're going to do what I like to do, is just have a rapid fire question session.
Okay.
And these are like just short answers. And I may have to ask you to give a little detail on that if it's something like, whoa, but it's just fun questions. Okay. So you are a globetrotter. You have traveled many places. What is your dream travel destination that you've either gone to already or you want to go to?
I would say Zanzibar Island off the coast of East Africa. I like, these are places that I've been. I like Gondar in northern Ethiopia, Lalibela in northern Ethiopia, and I'd say Timbuktu in present-day Mali, West Africa.
Wow.
Those are like those probably wouldn't be my favorite countries per se, but certainly sites that I would go and just live forever.
Okay, you said Mali, and that was on my DNA chart, so.
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting. Okay, oh God, I didn't even jot it down, all the places you went. So I'm like, I'm going to have to ask you that off the record so I can look into those places. Okay, how about this one? Pineapple on your pizza or not? Yes or no?
Only pineapple.
What?
Yes.
What? How do you do it? Pineapple and chicken?
No, just pineapples only.
That's it?
That's all I want on my pizza.
Are you vegetarian?
I eat chicken and turkey, but I just like pineapple pizza. There is a barbecue chicken pizza that I like, but I probably wouldn't get it with pineapple. If I just ordered on a random day, ordered a pizza, it would be a large pineapple pizza.
Really?
Yes.
Oh my God, you're the first one I've ever known to say just pineapple.
Yeah.
I'm like, either they say no or it's pineapple and chicken. I like pineapple and chicken, but.
Easy question.
All right. Okay. Let's see here. If your life had a theme song, what would it be?
If my life had a theme song, what would it be? Some Bob Marley song. I don't know. Pick one.
I was about to say, or if when you walk into the room, because sometimes you gotta hype that your spirit up. And for me, I always had to like in my mind, if I'm nervous, so just put a theme song in my head and when I start walking around.
I would probably walk into Soul Rebel by Bob Marley.
Okay.
Because you got that rebel spirit. I might not be out there protesting in the streets, but I have a rebel spirit.
Okay. I like that. All right. So this is the last question. And I think this is one of those kind of serious rapid fire questions.
Okay.
But what is the best advice you have ever received?
The best advice I've ever received, honestly, is it's okay to be selfish. It's okay to do what you enjoy doing. It's okay to be where you want to be and not worry about how other people are going to respond. It's okay to do what you want to do, and that's really what everybody does, or most people. I don't like to ever say everybody, but most people, they're out here living the life they want to live. So you shouldn't worry about, do they approve? I mean, obviously, we don't want to encourage anybody to commit any crime or be sinful, but, do what you want to do with your life. It's your life to live. A lot of times we almost put ourselves in prison by trying to live up to other people's expectations and concern ourselves with how other people are going to respond with the decisions that we make. Everybody is living the life that they want to live, and I encourage people to do the same thing. It's okay to be selfish. I know we've been taught that that's not a good trait, but it's okay to be concerned about your own well-being and your own desires and the things that you enjoy in life. This is your life. You live it. Be kind to people, though. Be a decent human being, regardless of people's background, regardless of their status. I'm a strong, promoter of just genuine human kindness, So enjoy your life and respect other people's lives and be kind to people. It doesn't take much.
Okay, guys, on that note, I'm going to end this podcast on that note because that was really empowering. So guys, remember those words and take from it all the fruit that you can, because it's true. In today's world, it's very, very true. And I want to thank Professor J for stopping by after class to talk to us. Thank you so much. And I hope to have you on the podcast again, because if there are more questions that we can ask of you and gain from the knowledge from you. Guys, if you have any questions or comments or even ideas in which you would like to hear on this podcast, please don't forget to just drop us a line. You can find the information in the description. But until then, thank you so much for tuning in to see me after class, and I hope to see you again.
And I hope to see you in class.
That's true. Make sure you have your toe in class. Have a good one, guys.
All right.
Bye-bye.